U.S. Department of the Treasury. The State of Labor Market Competition. March 7, 2022. Executive Summary. On July 9, 2021, President Biden signed an historic executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. That order underscored the importance of competition in the labor market, stating that a competitive marketplace creates more high-quality jobs and the economic freedom to switch jobs or negotiate a higher wage. The order tasked the Treasury Department, in consultation with the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, and the Federal Trade Commission to investigate the effects of a lack of labor market competition on the United States labor market. The purpose of the report is to summarize the prevalence and impact of uncompetitive firm behavior in labor markets. In particular, the report catalogs the ways in which insufficient labor market competition hurts workers, documents the proliferation of barriers to job mobility, and illustrates how a lack of labor market competition can hold back the broader macroeconomy, while also providing an assessment of the degree to which lack of competition lowers wages. This analysis is followed by a description of Biden administration actions to improve competition, including a commitment by the Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission to vigorously enforce antitrust laws in labor markets. In discussing the market characteristics that enable monopsony power, this report describes how monopsony power emerges when a single firm can restrain its hiring to lower wages and boost profits. While most labor markets do not literally feature a single employer, a market with a small set of employers may mimic a monopsony by each engaging in practices that give them market power over workers. Concentration in particular industries and locations can lead to workers receiving less pay, fewer benefits, and worse conditions than what they would under conditions of greater competition. There is also increasing recognition that market power may be inherent in the firm-worker relationship. Much of the theory of labor markets and wage setting is premised on the idea that individual workers and firms search for one another, seek and find matches that maximize productivity and wages, and bargain over employment terms. Workers often find themselves at an informational disadvantage relative to firms, not knowing what other, similarly placed workers earn, the competitive wages for their labor, or the existence of workplace problems like discriminatory conduct or unsafe working conditions. Workers also may have a limited or no ability to switch locations and occupations quickly and may lack the financial resources to support themselves while they search for jobs that pay more and better match their skills and abilities. These conditions can enable firms to exert market power, and consequently offer lower wages and worse working conditions, even in labor markets that are not highly concentrated. The report details the range of practices that firms use to restrain competition for workers, most clearly to lower wages and benefits, but also potentially to negatively impact job characteristics beyond just compensation. Firms can engage in tacit collusion by sharing wage information for different occupations, conspiring to fix wages, adopting no-poach agreements where firms agree not to hire other firms' workers, or forcing workers to sign non-compete agreements that limit their ability to switch jobs. Non-disclosure agreements can be so broad as to effectively operate as non-compete agreements. Mandatory arbitration agreements prevent workers from legal recourse to rectify violations of labor laws, antitrust laws, or employment terms. Lack of pay transparency, from firms' use of salary history, pay secrecy, and punitive practices against workers sharing pay information, also restrains competition. A growing literature in economics seeks to measure the labor market power exerted by firms over workers. As David Card, the most recent recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, stated in his presidential address to the American Economic Association, "I will try to make the case that the time has come to recognize that many, or even most, firms have some wage-setting power." Measuring the extent of labor market power can be challenging, as it requires extensive insight into the relationship between firms and workers that goes beyond standard measures collected. As this report highlights, a careful review of credible academic studies places the decrease in wages at roughly 20% relative to the level in a fully competitive market. In some industries and occupations, like manufacturing, estimates of wage losses are even higher. Wage-setting power is also evident in the large number of workers who are subject to rules and agreements that limit their ability to switch jobs and occupations and, hence, their bargaining power. For example, a recent paper estimates that 1 in 5 workers is currently subject to non-compete agreements and double that number report having been bound by a non-compete agreement in the past. As the report discusses, many workers are also subject to excessive occupational licensing requirements that impede their ability to switch jobs across states or their ability to enter a new occupation. The report also highlights the ways in which employers alter the structure of their own work relationships to lower their labor costs and undercut competition at the expense of workers. The labor market has become fissured. A wide variety of roles ranging from cafeteria workers and janitors to lawyers that were once in-house are now contracted out. This domestic outsourcing is estimated to reduce wages from 4% to 24% in some industries and occupations. Moreover, when firms misclassify workers, they offload labor costs and risks onto workers, for example, by avoiding unemployment insurance taxes and workers' compensation premiums, and make it difficult for workers to organize or join a union and bargain collectively for better wages and conditions. The decline in union density rates further weakens workers' bargaining power, leaving them with less ability to counterbalance firms' wage-setting power. The impacts of insufficient labor market competition often fall hardest on women and workers of color, who make up a larger share of workers in lower-paid occupations. These workers often have diminished bargaining power because they lack the resources to easily switch jobs or occupations, to reject or negotiate against signing restrictive employment agreements, or to seek legal recourse for violations of labor and employment law. The report also highlights the ways in which a lack of labor market competition can impact the broader economy. Lack of labor market competition contributes to high levels of income inequality, diminishes incentives for firms to invest, inhibits the creation and expansion of new firms, and reduces productivity growth through lower reallocation of labor across firms and industries. The Biden administration is committed to promoting robust competition in labor markets and has directed a government-wide effort to support labor market competition. The Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission are committing to the vigorous enforcement of antitrust laws in labor markets, to combat anti-competitive agreements, conduct, or mergers. The administration has called on Congress to raise the minimum wage and support increased worker power through increased organizing and collective bargaining facilitated by the Protecting the Right to Organize Act and other legislation. The President's Task Force on Worker Organizing and Empowerment recommended 70 actions that executive branch agencies and departments will implement to facilitate greater union organizing and collective bargaining. As part of his executive order on competition, the President encouraged the Federal Trade Commission to consider banning or limiting the use of non-compete agreements. The President's executive order increasing the minimum wage for federal employees and contractors raised wages for more than 300,000 private sector employees and 70,000 federal employees. Finally, in addition to education, compliance assistance, and enforcement of workplace laws, the Department of Labor's administrative actions include addressing worker misclassification, supporting worker organizing, and working to improve job quality, including access to jobs with higher wages and better working conditions. Table of Contents. Introduction. On July 9, 2021, President Biden signed a historic executive order on promoting competition in the American economy. The order affirms the importance of competition for workers, stating that a competitive marketplace creates more high-quality jobs and the economic freedom to switch jobs or negotiate a higher wage. Yet, as the order explains, empirical evidence suggests that anti-competitive forces and practices have weakened workers' bargaining positions and, consequently, worsened outcomes for workers. The order outlined a whole-of-government approach to addressing the excessive concentration of labor markets in the United States. As part of this comprehensive approach, the order directed the Secretary of the Treasury, in consultation with the Attorney General, the Secretary of Labor, and the Chair of the FTC, to produce a report on the effects of lack of competition on labor markets. This report reaffirms the urgent need to promote competition in labor markets and increase workers' bargaining power. A central finding is that the American labor market is characterized by high levels of employer power. Sources of this market power include natural labor market frictions, employer concentration, and anti-competitive labor market practices. Employers exploit this market power by holding wages and certain non-wage benefits beneath their competitive level. Simultaneously, the decline in unionization reduced worker bargaining power. 1. As a result, workers are forced to accept lower wages and worse benefits than in a competitive market. These impacts are often disproportionately felt by socioeconomically vulnerable people, such as low-income workers, workers of color, women, and immigrants. Problems stemming from lack of competition harm more than just the well-being of workers and their families. It also holds back our entire economy, contributing to income inequality, inhibiting innovation, and curbing economic growth. Employer market power can manifest in forms beyond reductions in workers' earnings that are challenging to measure. Many of today's jobs impose unpredictable just-in-time schedules, detailed on-the-job monitoring coupled with demanding speed requirements and punitively short breaks, inadequate safety systems, and no opportunity for advancement. While these determinants of job quality are harder to measure than wages, and therefore less well studied, they also suggest that labor markets are not perfectly competitive. First, this report begins by exploring some of the theoretical underpinnings of firm labor market power. We then survey the empirical literature on many of the primary developments that have contributed to persistently low labor market competition and worker bargaining power in recent decades. Topics surveyed include shifting firm boundaries, fissuring of the workplace, restrictive employment agreements, for example, non-compete agreements, mandatory arbitration clauses, and occupational licensing. We also document the decline in worker mobility and bargaining power and note the literature on the divergence between labor productivity and labor income, labor's share of overall income, and declining enforcement actions, among other things. We highlight how these developments have impacted specific industries and sectors of the economy, including hospitals and nursing, agricultural inputs and food processing, and minor league baseball. Empirical studies of labor market power have proliferated recently, as academic interest in the topic enjoys a renaissance. As papers address the empirical problem using a variety of methods, economists can increasingly paint a nuanced picture of labor market power as it exists today. Considerable debate over details, big and small, persist, but recent literature agrees on the broader picture. Many employers exert market power when hiring workers, and those workers are compensated less as a result. We conclude the analysis portion of the paper by highlighting the implications of diminished labor market competition on the broader economy. This includes growing income inequality, declining business investment and productivity growth, declining worker mobility and productivity growth through less reallocation, and lower levels of firm formation and innovation. The extent to which this area has gained traction was demonstrated by an address by economist David Card, the most recent recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, at the annual meeting of the American Economic Association. In his address, Card calls on the field of economics to study the role of imperfect competition in labor markets, while observing that widespread lack of competition has become the consensus view in economics. Card concludes his address by noting, "One of the most exciting developments in the field today is the evidence of labor economists taking questions about wage setting seriously. This effort began with Manning's 2003 landmark book. I hope that the growing body of work since then finds its way into the classroom and into the textbooks soon. I also expect this work to lead to some rethinking on policies such as minimum wages, the regulation of trade unions, and antitrust. See Langella and Manning 2021, and Naidu and Posner 2022. Perhaps we may even see a re-evaluation of the widespread belief that excessive wages are the root cause of many economic problems. After all, if your employer set your wage, it's hard to believe that it's too high." 2. With a similar spirit, the Biden administration has prioritized policies to restore labor market competition and increase the relative bargaining power of workers. The report concludes with the administration's policies to counteract the decline in labor market competition, including a policy favoring full enforcement of the antitrust laws in labor markets, expanding opportunities for collective bargaining, raising the minimum wage, and extending health insurance coverage to reduce job loss and boost mobility.